Women. Women are beautiful, women are strong, women are nurturing. Women have the potential to be each other's biggest champions and strongest supporters. But women can also be each other's harshest critics, jealous and vindictive. From the quintessential mother in law versus Bahu trope to the trope of two pretty girls who can never be friends, female equations are complex, marred with the sexism society has taught us and competition we don't know how to rid ourselves of. We live in a world where it's cool to not be like other girls and to run in circles where you have more male than female friends. This is the universe of every young girl's childhood, and it was the universe of the girls living on tiny Vancouver Island in British Columbia in the fall of 1997. It was a universe that was soon about to boil over into a tragic tale of violence and murder. This is the story of that tiny Canadian island. This is the story of Reena Virk. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm Aishwarya, your host for this episode.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is a tale with characters so real they feel like you know them until you realize you don't. Before we begin today's story, we want to thank the work of Rebecca Godfrey in her book titled Under the Bridge. Her interviews with the more than 200 people associated with this case formed an invaluable source for us. Godfrey passed away in 2018 from lung cancer, but her book became one of the major reasons why this story got the attention it should.
Speaking of attention, Aishwarya,
Which Aran loves.
I do love my attention. But speaking of it, we want you to give us some attention and go hit the subscribe button down
So
there.
easy
That
to
red
do.
little thing. It's free. It barely requires any calories. And guys, 80% of you watching this video right now aren't subscribers according to the data the
Mind-blowing.
YouTube gurus tell us.
Do it right
so
now.
please subscribe so we can grow the channel, pay our videographer Evan in the back, and continue to grow.
Chapter 1: The Night of the Fiery Sky. On the evening of the 14th of November 1997, in the tiny middle-class pastoral town of Vieux Royal, British Columbia, as the youth of the town gathered to party their Friday away, adults gathered for drinks and billiards at the local watering hole, and the elderly sat on their balconies to enjoy a beer in the full moon night, a large streak of light flashed through the sky. People stared up in awe. Was this a shooting star? It looked too bright to be a single star and too improbable for it to be multiple shooting stars all at once. Was the town witnessing its very own UFO sighting? By 1997, there had been decades worth of eerie UFO sightings all across the northern US and southern Canada. This could be it, the town residents thought. Quote, it was fire-colored, orange-reddish, with a head that was white. It was so cool, recounts a resident who was just 18 that night. As much as the town was in awe, though, it also felt on edge by this otherworldly sight. 44 calls were made that night to the police by onlookers wondering what the hell was going on in the otherwise mundane skies above their heads. Quote, I heard a gunshot, one resident told the police. Quote, there's something weird in the sky, said another. I think there's a fire outside, said yet another. But while the entire town, including Vieux Royal police, looked upwards in the sky, 6 youngsters gathered under the Craigflower Bridge, ganged up against one 14-year-old girl. As the town looked upwards, under this bridge, a brutal and heinous crime was being committed that was so rare and mind-blowing, the police would have to be begged to believe it. But like I said, this isn't just the story of an unbelievable crime. It's the story of very believable characters who would go on to commit this unbelievable crime. And to really understand this story, we must understand these characters. And to understand these characters, we'll go back just a few months in time to the fall of 1997, when the roads of all of these characters would coincide. Chapter 2: Women in the Mob. In August of 1997, living in the town of View Royale was a beautiful, leggy blonde named Josephine Bell. Described as a twisted little troublemaker with straight long hair, a belly button piercing, adorning a cigarette in hand and gangster rap in her ears, Josephine was the star of View Royale's youth, their one true role model. But like a lot of View Royale's youth, Josephine was born into a troubled home with an absent father and a mother who couldn't care less, causing her to move from group home to group home, finally ending up in a group home in View Royale called Seven Oaks.
What is a group home, Aishwarya?
It's for Aryan children who've left their parents' home due to allegations of abuse, due to allegations of sexual assault. They've gone into the government sort of rehabilitation system for young kids who are not yet old enough to be out into the world on their own. And Josephine too was that. She was just 14 years of age when she had been kicked out of her parents' home and had nowhere to go. So the state had taken her in, put her into this group home from where she should have technically gone to a foster family.
Yeah. So this is like a middle ground between an orphanage and a foster care.
Precisely.
Got it.
In that group home, Josephine met her best friend, more sister than best friend, Kelly Ellard. Kelly, unlike Josephine, was neither as confident nor as troubled. She was the stepdaughter of George Pecos, the Canadian soccer star responsible for winning the 1986 FIFA World Cup for the Canadian national team.
Wait, the Canadian national team has won the World Cup?
The World Cup, yep. He scored the winning goal against the Hungarian team.
Aishwarya, I don't think the Canadian team has won the World Cup.
Wait, no, it has. Literally, check.
Fact check. As we can check in real time, guys.
No, just type George Pecos.
It was Argentina that won in 1986.
Okay, so he won the match then.
There's a big difference between winning a match and the World Cup.
We're not letting this go in. George Pecos, soccer.
So after a quick fact check, George Pecos scored the winning goal in the qualifier, not winning the World Cup for Canada, okay? So
I mean, for those of you who don't follow soccer, does it really make a difference?
She's calling it soccer for starters, guys. It's football. Anyway, Aishwarya, back to the case.
Regardless of whether it was the qualifying or the actual World Cup, George Pecos was the town hero. Yet Kelly fit in better in the group home with Josephine. She was quieter, with shorter hair, looking like a quote, lost puppy all the time, according to people who knew her back then. Quite different from Josephine. But to Josephine, Kelly was the only girl who had never been jealous of her or called her a slut just because she was pretty. When Josephine would move around from group home to group home, it wasn't her family's photo she would keep by her bedside. It was Kelly's. Both these girls, 15 years old in 1997, are relatable to us even today, albeit in different ways. We all know someone with a little bit of Josephine and a little bit of Kelly in them. But both of them were different from the girls we might know in some very fundamental ways. At 15, when you and I cared about creating castles in sand and waved hi to airplanes that flew in the sky, or gushed over first kisses and first boyfriends, when we had dreams of becoming a doctor or a dancer, Josephine and Kelly dreamed of men like Al Capone, the American gangster nicknamed Scarface, and men like John Gotti, the mafioso don who founded the Gambino crime family of New York. I'll become the first female hitman. They like women in the mob. Women don't have to serve any time if they get caught, she was infamous for saying. Kelly would nod in agreement. Kelly wasn't just a meager follower though. In her locker were drawings of gangsters shooting cops, disembodied heads, and severed hands. The girls listened to Notorious B.I.G., dreamed of joining the cartels of New York and LA, and imagined the thrill of murder.
These girls would have been die-hard Desi crime fans.
Absolutely. They would have loved what
they
we
sound
do.
like a bunch of Desi crime fans.
Absolutely. And can you see the appeal of girls like this to another young teenage girl?
Of course. It's so
So
aspirational, badass, that sort of badass
weird
attitude.
Reason, yeah. In this gang of two was a third, much less important member, another deeply troubled black girl named Dusty. Dusty had first been kicked out of her home by her mother, who simply couldn't find a way to control her, and then been kicked out by her older sister after she threatened to kill one of her sister's kids, crashed her sister's car, and painted the words N-word rules on her sister's wall. Dusty now found herself in View Royale too, living in the same group home, Seven Oaks, where Josephine lived and Kelly hung out. The three were attached at the hip, with Josephine as the default leader, smoking up together, partying together, and going to the same school together, where they were the popular girls. Popular not in the admirable sense of the word though, and I hope you're catching on to that slowly. The group was known to be trouble, getting into run-ins with the law for shoplifting or stealing cars. Josephine had stolen a car, a Chanel mascara, Dior eyeshadow, a bra, a handbag, and a pair of Calvin Klein jeans. This was her reputation. That fall of 1997, a young, troubled boy would join their club. A boy named Warren Glowatsky, or Warren G as he began to be called after the American rapper. Warren G was a young 16-year-old boy who had learned how to drive because his mother made him drive every day to buy her cigarettes. He lived his entire life in a trailer with his cold father and alcoholic mother, moving from town to town until his father decided to marry some random widow in the US and move into her home, leaving Warren G behind with only a mother who was always drunk out of her mind. But in 1997, Warren G found a place he belonged, in View Royale with the girl he had fallen in love with, a beautiful half-Spanish girl named Sarita. Sarita went to the same school as Josephine, Kelly, and Dusty, a school named Shoreline Jr. And when Warren G began to go to this school too, he became friends with the three. But Warren G was different from the three girls. He possessed a kindness they did not. He was respectful to Sarita's mother, helping her with household chores and never cursing around her. And he was respectful to Sarita too, to the point where his school's guidance counselor wanted him and Sarita to talk to other kids in the class about non-violent conflict resolution between young couples. From that fact alone, I hope you get an idea of what View Royale and what the school Shoreline Jr. was like. A town considered to be on the wrong side of the tracks. It was home to kids who named themselves after drug cartels and rappers, a town where boyfriends hit their girlfriends and cops were called to trailer homes over domestic fights. It was a town where the coolest thing you could be was black, because being black to them meant being like the infamed rappers of Chicago and LA. Shoreline was a school so poor, they had no money to even get the students' uniforms or the sports team their own jerseys. Quote, I just knew pretty well for my whole life I would never be friends with anyone from Shoreline. I don't know why, recounts a girl named Madeline who was valedictorian at a much wealthier school. When Shoreline students would go to a different school for a competition or game, students from other schools would scrape the S off of Shoreline, referring to the school as Whoreline instead. Sounds petty and maybe even a little funny, but the world of teenagers in Shoreline and View Royale was brutal, already having stripped its youth of its innocence. In this town, Warren G seemed different. He was part of the local gang called Crips, again named after the street gang of South California, but this gang was more symbolic than anything else. What was this?
मैंने Crips का sign बनाया.
Oh, shit. The kids in this gang did and sold drugs and stole, but they weren't a mob gang like their namesake. They were just kids at the end of the day after all. In this gang of Crips where everyone wore black, Warren G exclusively wore white. Yes, he was in the Crips, but he felt more at home with Sarita's family than with Crips like Josephine and Kelly. Like I said, he seemed to have a kindness the others did not. Little Cutie and Romeo was what he was called for his boyish face and small stature. He was pretty in a young Leonardo DiCaprio kind of way, recount people who knew him back then. And Sarita loved that about him, his boyish charm and baby face. That fall of 1997, while Josephine, Kelly, and Dusty were busy being their bossy, arrogant selves, when Warren G was busy falling deeper in love with Sarita and Sarita with him, an outsider was about to enter View Royale. An outsider named Reena Virk. Reena was 14 that year, a year younger than Josephine and gang, and 2 years younger than Warren G. Reena had a life different from these kids, very different actually. She didn't even go to school with any of them. She went to a school called Colquitt's Jr. in a different part of town. And so, before fall of 1997, she didn't know who Josephine or Kelly or Dusty or Warren G were. But somehow, she would also, like Warren G, feel most at home in this group. But the fact that this group did not want her with them wouldn't dawn on Reena until it would be too late. Until the night of the large orange flashes would be seen in the sky. Chapter 3. Beautiful British Columbia. Manjeet Virk was a young 23-year-old English literature master's student at Punjab University in the 1970s. With a specialization in Shakespearean dramas, this was a young man who loved to read romantic poetry but loved tragedies the best. Manjeet had no aspirations of moving to Canada, unlike a lot of his peer group. But when his older sister moved to Canada and sent him a brochure titled Beautiful British Columbia, Manjeet knew he just had to visit the place in the pictures. And when he visited, he never left. Some could say it was beautiful British Columbia that made him stay in Canada, but the truth was it was a warm Indian-Canadian girl named Suman, beautiful Suman, who he really stayed for. He soon realized his master's in English Lit wouldn't convert to a degree in Canada, so he gave up his dreams of becoming a professor or a teacher and instead took up a job as a lumberjack.
He cut wood for a living to stay with this woman.
To stay with this woman. You must have really loved her.
She must have been a really beautiful Suman.
Suman was the warmest, kindest,
That's
nicest
beautiful.
lady. While Suman and Suman's mother looked and sounded like they belonged to the very large Hindu and Sikh majority in their town, the truth was they were a minority within that majority. You see, when Suman's mother had moved to Canada, she was a devout Hindu. But in Canada, she and her religion were viewed with suspicion. Her sari was looked at weird by others, as was her way of talking, and so people stayed away from her. But then, one day, someone knocked on her door. It was two people, two Jehovah's Witness followers. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jehovah's Witnesses are a Christian denomination who are known for their door-to-door preaching. They consider the world doomed, morally corrupt, and under the spell of Satan. The only solution, according to them, is the complete destruction of the world, which they think is about to happen, and the subsequent establishment of God's kingdom over earth. They object to the military, refuse to salute symbols like national flags or national anthems. They object to celebrations like birthdays or anniversaries. They reject blood transfusions and have countless practices considered morally suspect by the rest of the world. Now, these two strangers who showed up at Suman's mother's door, these two Jehovah's Witnesses, treated her with kindness in the way others hadn't. They communicated with her even though her English was broken, and they returned to her home for tea when she invited them while others stayed away. Soon, Suman's mother found herself moving away from Hinduism and moving towards the worship of Prophet Jehovah. When Suman was born and she grew older, she took on her mother's beliefs and became a practicing Jehovah's Witness. So when Manjeet met Suman, he too accepted and imbibed her belief system, making them a household that prayed to Prophet Jehovah. This made them an odd combination of identities. They were Indians in Canada living in a predominantly Hindu and Sikh town where they were Jehovah's Witnesses. Whether or not they ever perfectly fit in, they were happy with their odd mixture of identities. And they only got happier when the two soon got married and then in 1983 gave birth to their first child, a beautiful baby girl named Reena Virk. Unlike the other kids of View Royale, Reena had a happy childhood. Her parents loved and cared for her. She had both her biological parents to begin with, unlike Josephine, Warren Reed, Dusty, Sarita, or Kelly. She grew up around her mother's younger brother, her uncle Raj, who also doted after her. But to Reena, her life seemed less than perfect, far from it actually. In her school, Reena was an outcast, either bullied or ignored, with the latter sometimes being worse to the sensibilities of a teenage girl. Made fun of for her hairy legs or stocky build or dark brown skin or wide hips or black hair that fell to her shoulders. It was hard being a girl, and even harder being an Indian girl in a white school. At home, the teachings of Prophet Jehovah irritated her teenage desires. She grew up not receiving any presents for her birthdays in a home where makeup was frowned upon and nail polish was considered makeup. Shaving her legs was considered a worldly fixation, candies were compared to nicotine and alcohol, and her love for rap was considered nihilistic. Reena belonged nowhere. All your problems go away when you die, Reena's neighbor remembers Reena saying. Strong words for a 14-year-old. Chapter 4. Teenage Paradise. To be able to find a place where she felt like she belonged, Reena began skipping classes, missing family dinners, and cutting drives with her uncle to hang out in a park in View Royale, where View Royale's troubled youth gathered to smoke cigarettes, weed, and sometimes more. In that park, a friend Reena made told Reena about Seven Oaks, the group home that Josephine, Kelly, and Dusty called home. And one day, after hearing praise about the group home, Reena visited it with her friends. That was the day Reena met Josephine, Kelly, and Dusty. That was the day Reena's life would take a turn. Among the three, Reena most aspired to be like Josephine. She just had a way about her when she walked with her black platform heels across the floor of the group home. In their company, Reena began smoking more than ever, began listening to gangster rap, got the word Crip written on her arm, and even bragged about having a probation officer. But Reena's attempts at fitting in were transparent. For fuck's sake, Reena, you can't have a PO if you've never been arrested. Leave us alone, Dusty recalls saying. Despite the group's indifference to Reena, though, Reena took even the slightest sign of attention from them to be an affirmation of their friendship. And those small affirmations, combined with Reena's dreams of freedom, were enough for her to want to move herself into the group home. She thought living in a group home would, quote, catapult her into teen paradise, according to Reena's own parents. And to be able to leave her home and pull off the move, Reena took a step that would be very hard to come back from. Reena went to Child Protective Services, filed a sexual, physical, and mental assault complaint against her father, and soon found herself living at Seven Oaks in the company of the girls she most wanted to be like.
The young teen made the sexual abuse allegation against her father. The Virk said the Canadian ministry didn't conduct an investigation or even question them.
It made me feel like you're living in Nazi Germany, where they come in and take whoever they want and do what they want, and you have no say.
That's so crazy.
It's crazy, right?
And because she did that, there was no investigation. It was just acted upon by
It was
the
just acted
protection
upon.
services.
Which is one of Reena's parents' complaints, is that you've believed the story of this child, basically, who's fictionalized this
Who's a
drama
child.
in their hell. Exactly, who is
Yeah.
a child at the end
How
of
many
the day.
times have I wanted
Without
to run
any
away?
investigation? Absolutely.
Come back for dinner
absolutely.
immediately. Yeah.
Wow. But the dreams of fitting in better by living with the girls came crashing down as fast as they had been built up. For starters, the freedom Reena longed for, the freedom for which she came to the group home, didn't really exist in reality. The group home had a strict 11 p.m. curfew, after which the gates were shut and nobody was allowed back in until the next morning. Girls like Josephine made this work because they had friends with whom they could crash for the night, but Reena didn't. Secondly, the group home had a vigorous system of cataloguing the girls' every move. Who do they seem friendly with? What conversations did they regularly have? Who comes to visit them? When do they leave the home? Etc. These two details about the group home, the 11 p.m. curfew and the vigorous cataloguing system, are details I want you to remember because they will be key in helping figure out what really happened under Craig Flower Bridge the night of the orange flashes.
Ashwina, this almost Orwellian setup
Yeah.
is not out of place, in my opinion, because
No.
these are vulnerable
Young
women,
girls,
like young
yeah.
girls, in fact. And, tracking their moves and who they're talking to and what they're talking about is, I think, imperative to prevent them from being exploited
Absolutely.
by men who I'm sure are in the hordes in this area of Canada.
Absolutely, and they look for girls without families because
course,
they think
of
those are
course.
the easiest ones to prey on. It's also necessary, in my opinion, because these are girls who've constantly had run-ins with the law.
Yeah.
So this is a
So,
system
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
prevent that or to have
Correct.
enough information when it happens in the future, that kind of thing. And this will be helpful. Aside from the group home not being ideal though, Reena also realized that not even her most sincere efforts could get Josephine to care about her. She felt excluded from plans, felt like the women made snide remarks towards her, much like her peers back at school, and even after ruining her relationship with her parents, she still didn't fully fit in. To Josephine, Reena was, quote, very insecure. I didn't really want to hang out with her anymore because it seemed like she was jealous of me, end quote. Reena also realized that the girl she most admired had been stealing from her. Reena's Chanel mascara and her hairdryer were missing, and she was fairly certain Josephine had taken them, but Reena was too scared of her to ask for it back. Josephine's attitude towards Reena had slowly broken her heart, and in a move to retaliate against Josephine, Reena apologized to her parents, dropped the charges against her father, and moved back home. But before she left Seven Oaks, Reena decided to show Josephine that she too was strong. She too was tough. She too could join a mob if she wanted. She couldn't be trampled over. And so Reena walked over to Josephine's room in her absence, opened her drawers, and stole her phone book. Josephine wouldn't realize her phone book was missing until she started running into people who started to say the weirdest things to her. Hey, I just got a phone call, Josephine. Some girl called me and told me you have AIDS. Hey, Josephine, I heard your eyebrows are fake and drawn with pencil. Hey, Josephine, I just got a phone call. Some girl called and asked if I'd seen you lately and said you weren't so pretty anymore. Josephine, why am I getting phone calls from people saying you hate me? Why do you hate me? And these comments just wouldn't stop. Every other person Josephine would run into would have something negative about her to point out to her. She soon realized it was her phone book someone had stolen and was using to call all her contacts. But she didn't realize who had stolen the book until she ran into the school heartthrob, a boy named Colin Jones. Quote, Josephine, don't give my number out to random people, Colin said to her when he saw her. What? I didn't, Josephine must have said with the most confused look on her face. Some chick named Reena has been calling me 10, 20 times a day for weeks, telling me she has a crush on me and wants to go out with me. Colin was angry. He didn't even know this girl. He only remembered seeing her once for a fleeting moment at a grocery store where he said hi to her. There was no attraction between the two. She wasn't his type. In fact, Colin had a girlfriend. He was actually around his girlfriend when the first call from Reena had come. His mom had picked up the second call. In an attempt to get Reena to stop calling, Colin had agreed to a date with her, only to never show up to the date at all, leaving Reena feeling lonelier than ever. Colin was annoyed by the inconvenience of incessant calls, and his annoyance was palpable to Josephine. That's when it hit her. Reena had stolen her phone book, and it made perfect sense. In a move that neither Colin expected nor Josephine, Josephine apologized to Colin. You won't be hearing from her again.
Aishwarya, I've read a lot of psychologists talk about the difference in bullying between men and women, between girls and boys.
Yeah.
I mean, from our childhood, our fights used to be pretty straightforward.
Between men, yeah.
We used to hit each other, or
Right.
say slurs that we would regret now that we've grown older.
Yeah.
You ladies were up to something else
Something completely
altogether,
different.
dude.
Yes.
What the hell?
This episode is so much about female dynamics and how women interact with each other. It's scary that this truly is the childhood of so many young
It
women.
is, yeah. But to get this sort of almost a transparent insight into one case
Absolutely,
really
yeah.
tells you how much more goes on in sort of circles in general and how convoluted
These
teenage life can
interactions
be
are,
for
Young
girls.
girls, yeah.
But god damn, you
This
ladies
is
are
insane.
on
I agree.
something else.
I agree. You won't be hearing from her again. These were the words Josephine said to Colin before she left that day. These words took on a life of their own after the night of the orange flashes in the sky, a night that was around the corner. Chapter 5: The Last Supper. By the time Josephine had figured out that Reena was the caller trying to make her life a living hell, Reena was back home with her parents but felt more distant from them than ever. Her father had had to go to prison because of her, and while he was out now, this wasn't an easy thing for Reena's parents to forget. They were on edge with her because of her actions, and she was on edge, well, because she was a teenager. Little did she know, though, on the other side of the town, in View Royale, conversations about killing her and dumping her body in a ditch in the forest in an unmarked grave had already begun, albeit still as a joke. We actually don't know if this was ever meant fully as a joke or meant seriously. The discussion of killing Reena and dumping her body in a forest was happening on a phone conversation between Josephine and Kelly that was overheard by Josephine's mother one afternoon when Josephine had gone back home and begged her mom to let her in. To Josephine's mom, it sounded like the girls were just joking. They sounded like they hated Reena, yes, but the plan sounded like a joke nonetheless. So let's just say, for the moment, this was a joke. To Josephine, this was a normal joke to crack because this was the kind of joke John Gotti, her mob idol, would crack. But Josephine had something else in mind that wasn't a joke. I'm Josephine Bell. Nobody f***s with me. I've got more friends than enemies, she said to her posse of female friends whom she had asked to help beat Reena up. The plan was to invite Reena to a party the upcoming Friday on the 14th of November, have some of her friends gang up on her and beat her up a bit to teach her a lesson. Dusty was very happy to join this plan because Dusty had heard rumors that Reena was going around with her ex-boyfriend, a boy named Jack Batley. She had heard from a friend that Reena was seen wearing Jack Batley's famous jacket. Kelly was happy to join this plan because, well, Josephine. And so, the plan was put in motion. When the night of the 14th arrived, Reena was home with her parents, siblings, and uncle, eating dinner on her dining table as usual. That night, she only ate soup. Reena had been on a diet, her mom remembers. One of many things girls feel like they must do to fit in. As she ate her soup and prepared to play cards for the night with her younger brother Aman, her phone rang. When Reena picked up, she immediately noticed Josephine's excitement when Josephine asked her to join the girls at a party. Maybe Josephine's excitement should have been a red flag for Reena. This was a girl Reena had been bad-mouthing to all of View Royale. Why would she be so enthusiastic about calling Reena to a party with her?
Reena still yearned
Still
for
yearned for that
attention
friendship.
and
Absolutely.
validation.
In
yeah.
fact, even all of this bad-mouthing of Josephine maybe
Oh yeah, it
was
was
some
just a
way of trying to get Josephine's attention.
yeah.
I think I'll just stay in tonight, Reena responded. If only she had followed through on her original plan and stayed in that night, Reena might be alive today. But life was meant to take a different turn. The moment Josephine noticed Reena's reluctance, she handed the phone to Dusty. Not only was Dusty closer to Reena, but she was also a better liar. Come on, Reena, come party. We're not mad at you anymore, Dusty had said. They weren't mad at her anymore. It was almost as if that was all the affirmation Reena needed. They weren't mad at her anymore, meaning she had shown them she too could be tough. She too shouldn't be messed with. I'll meet you at the Walmart and we'll go to the party, Reena said before hanging up the phone. She told her parents she was going out and would be back by 10. She told her brother she'd play cards with him tomorrow. She wore Jack Batley's jacket thinking Dusty had forgiven her, and she ran out of her home.
I told her, don't go. At that point, I told her, I said, no, you can't change your plans just like that. It's late, leave your friends alone, it's winter time, it's cold out. Just have your shower and continue visiting us, and you can see them tomorrow. Invitation was too tempting for her, but I could see on her face there that she really didn't want to go, but she was forced to go for some reason.
Chapter 6. It was the Russians, not the Martians. From Walmart, the girls made their way to the field outside their school, Shoreline Junior. Every weekend, the youth of View Royale partied out in this field, and this night was no different. The night was going as Reena thought it should. At the party were Josephine, Kelly, Dusty, Reena, Warren G, Sarita, and almost 60 others, but it was mostly girls. There were so many girls, someone later recounted. That night, members of the View Royale Crips, the gang Warren G belonged to, the gang name Reena had written out on her hand, that gang was holding a party of their own for a member's birthday, and all the guys were there. That's why there were so many girls in the party at the field. Warren G, even though a Crip, was in the field with the girls because he wanted to spend time with his girlfriend, Sarita. In fact, Warren G had recently been thinking about quitting the Crips. You'll either end up dead or in jail, was the advice he had received from someone when he joined the gang. And that advice rang in his head day and night. It's not the life he wanted for himself. Like I said, Warren G was different. He seemed to have a kindness the others didn't. It was the same advice Reena's uncle had given her when he saw the word Crip on her hand. As this group partied away in the full moon light, at exactly 9:12 p.m., the sky lit up. After the startle of one loud boom, it looked beautiful. Orangish red, the sky looked ablaze as everyone looked up in awe. Even though the next morning it would be revealed the orange flashes weren't a UFO or a meteor shower, but a Russian satellite that had exploded on its fall to Earth, it was the Russians, not the Martians, as the news channels would say. The satellite had done one thing right. For one single fleeting moment, it had given this group of kids their last happy memory to hold on to before their lives changed forever. For one moment, teenage rivalries and plans for revenge were forgotten in entirety. But the fire in the sky was over within seconds, and the plan for revenge was back to the forefront. Soon after the satellite disappeared, Sarita walked over to Warren G to tell him she had a weird stomachache and really wanted to go home. Warren G, being the ideal boyfriend like always, wouldn't let Sarita walk home alone, but she insisted she could take the bus, not wanting to ruin his night. So the couple reached a compromise. Warren G would drop Sarita to the nearest bus stop and buy her a ticket so she wouldn't have to walk alone. Sarita agreed. But in the months after this night, Sarita will regret agreeing. She will wonder if things would have gone differently, if Reena would still be alive, had she agreed to let Warren G drop her all the way back home. She'll never know. Back at the party in the field, right after Warren G and Sarita had left, a girl Reena had never seen before, a girl named Lila, known for her crazy kickboxing skills, walked over to her. "I'm here to fight a girl," Lila said to the group. "Her name starts with an R or an S." The moment Reena heard this, she felt a pit in her stomach and something compelled her to drop her drink on the field and run as fast as she could towards the same bus stop where Warren G had dropped off Sarita. Just short of the bus stop, as Sarita got onto the bus and the bus began moving away, Josephine, Dusty, Kelly and Lila caught up with Reena, cornering her and taunting her. "We just want you to party with us, Reena. Don't be a bitch," Dusty said. "I was talking about a different girl and she isn't even here," Lila added. But Reena felt uneasy. If they didn't want to fight, why had they run behind me like this? She must have thought. "I just want to go home," Reena said as she walked into the phone booth on the street, shutting the phone booth door behind her, feeling safe within its thin glass walls. Reena picked up the phone and called home. Her baby brother Aman picked up. "I'm coming home. Can you tell Mom I'll be home soon?" Reena cried. Aman heard his sister cry and did the most any little brother could do. "Come home," he told Reena. But when Reena turned around after cutting the call, she realized the girls weren't ready to leave her yet. Dusty had pressed her face against the glass door of the phone booth from outside, almost mockingly, and was kicking it. Reena was scared to exit, but she knew she had to. As she opened the door and put a foot out, Dusty grabbed her. Reena asked the girls to let her go. "Give me your bus pass and we'll let you go home," Dusty said. And so an afraid Reena pulled out her bus pass from her handbag and handed it to her. In front of her eyes, Dusty lifted up the pass, tore it to pieces and flung it in the air. Now Reena had no idea how she would get back home safely. Dusty and Josephine grabbed Reena's arms and intertwined them with their arms, kind of making a chain, and they began walking with her. Lila lit a joint, but the group realized there were cops around and they shouldn't be smoking out on the streets. "Let's go under the bridge," they decided. There were cops around because at the field party, shortly before Reena ran, a boy named Nate threw a rock at the school window, and the window broke, prompting the school janitor to call the police at 9:25 p.m. Little did Nate know this one random act of throwing a rock at the window, an act he couldn't even give a reason for when he testified in court, would be why the women would take Reena under the bridge. Chapter 7. Bridge Under Troubled Waters. The area under the Craigflower Bridge, unlike the field outside Shoreline School, was devoid of young life. Nobody went to party there, nobody smoked up there. It was dingy under the bridge, like a dirty tunnel with graffiti, a tunnel that would shake and creak when cars passed above the bridge, people recall. But the girls went there that night, with Reena in tow. They didn't know why they went there. Maybe they had heard of some kids who had started hanging out there, maybe, they would say in court. But they didn't know, they just did. Seeing the girls go under the bridge, some others who had left the party followed along, making it a group of 14 girls and 2 boys in that tiny space where even the full moon's light couldn't properly make its way. As the group chatted and drank some more under there, most of them were caught off guard when Josephine suddenly screamed at Reena, "Why are you trying to ruin my life?" "I'm not," a scared Reena responded. But Josephine screamed louder this time, "Why are you trying to ruin my life?" "No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry," were the only words that left Reena's mouth, but the sounds of 14 girls screaming and flinging accusations at her drowned her apologies out. As Reena tried to be louder, tried to speak up, tried to explain herself, Josephine took the lit cigarette in her hand and pushed it onto Reena's forehead. Reena screamed in pain from the burn and moved to hit Josephine when Kelly stepped forward and punched Reena in the face. After this punch, a few ran up to the bridge, appalled at what they had just witnessed. Warren G, having left Sarita at the bus stop, was one of the people under the bridge who then ran up when the fight got serious. About 10 girls now remained under the bridge, having formed a circle around Reena, not letting her leave. Every time she tried to leave the circle, it became smaller around her, with the punches getting stronger and the slaps getting harder. Those who had run up just watched in horror, repeating the words, "Oh my God." And then something unfathomable happened. Something nobody saw coming. Something meant to be written out and studied in psychology textbooks. Warren G, the pretty boy, the perfect boyfriend, the respectful gentleman, the caring classmate, walked down the bridge to the circle, lifted his leg, and kicked Reena in her head. Unlike Josephine or Dusty, Warren G had never seen Reena before this night, much less have a reason to hit her. Unlike Lila, Warren G hadn't been called to help beat Reena up. He was just there, by chance. Unlike Kelly, Warren G didn't even like Josephine. He had absolutely no idea who Reena was or what she had done. Yet he kicked her in the head not once but multiple times. Those who stood above wondered, why is he doing that to a girl? One of the guys who stood up above went down to grab Warren G and stop him. "Chill out, Warren, it's not your fight," he screamed in the middle of Reena's cries and wails. But it's like Warren didn't hear his friend. He stood there, part of the circle, the only guy there, as the group continued to hit Reena, to the point where she slid off the rocks under the bridge and landed face down in the mud the water had collected. But the group still didn't stop. Those who stood above recount, Reena had all 4 of her limbs covering her face as she kept repeating the words, "Stop, stop, I'm sorry, stop, that's enough, please stop." Dusty, having noticed Reena wearing her ex-boyfriend's jacket, hit her harder with every ounce of power she had, to the point that she was bruising her own knuckles.
I think Kelly hit her, and then Desi hit her. So everybody just went crazy and just started hitting her.
Everybody.
Yeah.
You too.
Yeah.
She's your friend.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the best friends you ever had.
Yeah.
And you kicked her? Punched her?
Yeah.
And felt what as you were doing this?
Nothing. I didn't think.
But just like something had come over Warren G, making him hit Reena incessantly, something came over Lila, the kickboxing champion, who now suddenly began to protect Reena. "The next person to touch her gets a shot from me," she screamed at the group. Maybe Lila had realized this had gone too far. The lesson was taught. This was enough. And the moment Lila screamed, the group stopped. They stepped away from Reena and began to walk up the stairs to the top of the bridge. Those who were above looked down and recount that Reena was alive when the group broke up because they remember seeing her wipe her face and say, "I'm sorry, but I need to go home now." All of them also remember watching Reena climb up the stairs behind them, and they remember looking back in the street and watching Reena walk away from the bridge. Reena was alive when the group broke up. So then why? Why did Reena not make it home that night, even though she emerged from under the bridge and shakily walked on top of it on her way back home? Why, on November 22nd, 1997, 8 days after the night of the Russian satellite, was Reena's dead body found floating in the troubled waters under the bridge? Chapter 8. Group Frenzy. When the group broke up that night, the ones responsible for hitting Reena panicked, and it makes perfect sense that they did. Some felt ashamed at what they were just part of, others felt appalled that they were friends with those who were, but the panic was consistent among all. In that panic, the group of 16, 14 girls and 2 boys, split up. Nobody really took note of where the others went. They all just ran their own ways, going back home or to the group home or to a friend's place to crash. Those who were friends with Sarita thought about how they would tell her they had witnessed her boyfriend brutally beat up a girl. Josephine only thought about how Reena would now not mess with her. But slowly they all drifted asleep. But as they all drifted asleep, Sarita woke up at 11:30 p.m. because of an inexplicable feeling, a knot in her stomach that made her put her pillow on the floor and sleep there instead of her bed. Sarita didn't know that night what this feeling was, but soon she would know. The next morning, she would get a call from a friend, Tara, who stood up on the bridge that night, whose boyfriend went to pull Warren G out of the group. Tara told Sarita what she had seen. That same afternoon, Warren came over to Sarita's home, apologizing for his actions, saying only the words, "I don't know," every time Sarita asked him why he had hit a girl. But he didn't come only to say sorry. He had come to ask for Sarita's help in washing his clothes.
Ashwara, do we know if he was drunk or on any substance while this happened?
We don't. So kids at the party were definitely drinking, but I don't think any of them from accounts of other people that night, and we'll get into like
Yeah.
other accounts that we got from the night. But nobody was completely intoxicated. Nobody was certainly on any kind of
Okay,
serious hard drugs. Everyone did have a drink in their hand. They were drinking under the bridge as well. But nobody remembers anyone being like blackout
And
drunk.
Warren G is Mr. Goody Two Shoes.
Goody two shoes,
Does
yeah.
he have a history of drinking a lot or getting violent?
Not that we know of. Not getting violent at all. He was, Sarita called him the gentlest guy she had ever known. So no. So Warren had come over to ask for Sarita's help in washing his white clothes. Warren didn't even have enough quarters to get his own clothes washed. As Sarita washed Warren's white clothes though, there she noticed, on the bottom of his pants, spots of blood. She thought she now knew the cause behind the knot in her stomach. Her perfect boyfriend had spent the night hitting a girl to the point that he had blood on his pants. Little did Sarita know though, back at the Virk household, the family was beginning to wonder why the girl Warren had been hitting the night before hadn't still come back home. The fact that Reena had called crying the night before, saying she would come back home and still not made it back, was what stood out to the Virks. They wouldn't put it past their daughter to stay out all night. They didn't have the best relationship with her after all. But something about that call was odd to them. It was distressing. And so at 1:50 p.m. on November 15th, a missing persons report was filed with Reena's name written out on top. Over the next few days, this panicked frenzy of the group would spill into all parts of their life. Dusty ended up telling friends that Reena was dead, but that she only hit her a few times and that she left, and that it wasn't supposed to happen that way. Josephine would end up telling a new girl named Naya at Seven Oaks, a girl she was meeting for the first time, about how a girl she beat up is now missing and probably in the water somewhere. Kelly would end up telling a random guy who was trying to hit on her the same thing. Both Josephine and Kelly would go to their school principal asking for a copy of the school newspaper because they wanted updates on their, quote, missing friend, while blabbering to the principal about how their missing friend's concerned parents think they were involved in her disappearance when they, in fact, had nothing to do with it. All of these people, the new girl at Seven Oaks, the boy hitting on Kelly, the school principal, would later come forward to the police to recount these encounters, to describe how odd they were, how abrupt and transparent and shallow and devoid of any concern or remorse. Perhaps it was this sense of frenzy that brought some of the members of that group of 16 closer in the aftermath of Reena's beating and now disappearance. Sarita noticed this newfound closeness between her boyfriend Warren G and Kelly, a girl Warren didn't even like and wasn't even his type. She knows she noticed their closeness because she knows it made her jealous. A part of her wondered if the two had kissed that night, the night of the Russian satellite, after she had left in the bus. But another part of her knew something about that night didn't make sense, and it was more complicated than a kiss. Every time she saw Warren and Kelly whisper amongst each other, she wondered if their newfound closeness was because of the frenzy of Reena's beating and disappearance, or if it was something else. Chapter 9: The Girls of Vancouver Island. Girls weren't supposed to die on Vancouver Island. Sure, they may run away or do drugs or steal cars, but for them to be murdered was unfathomable. For them to be murdered by other young girls, even more so. Which is why, even though days passed to Reena's disappearance, the police didn't lift a finger to help find her. Not only do girls not die, and not only do girls run away, but Reena was a girl who had once run away. She would come back or live a happy life somewhere else, they thought, until a Russian girl came into the View Royale police station claiming to know what happened to Reena.
A Russian satellite, a
A
Russian
Russian
girl.
girl
What's
has a
happening
lot
in this
of
part
Russians
of Canada?
in View
What's up?
Royale. Yep. Quote, at my group home, I met a girl named Josephine who said she went with Reena Virk to the town bridge where she put a cigarette out on her forehead and beat her up and broke her arms and her jaw and her nose and then rolled her into the water. End quote. This Russian girl was the new girl at Seven Oaks, Naya, the same girl Josephine had blabbed to. Maybe Josephine had thought this girl was like the others. She would stay quiet out of fear of Josephine. But she wasn't. She was from a troubled home like Josephine, but unlike Josephine, she had a moral compass. And so here she was, telling the police all she knew, hoping they would do something with the information. And because of this one act of courage, the police changed the status of Reena's case from missing to possible homicide.
So this girl, Naya, is telling the police that Josephine rolled
Reena
into the water.
Yeah.
But from what you told us previously,
All we know is that
Reena,
they had that fight.
Reena was alive, got off,
Correct.
wiped her face, walked off the
Correct.
bridge.
This is the first time someone's hearing of Reena
Yeah.
being rolled in. Other than obviously like Dusty having blabbed saying Reena's dead.
Yeah.
Josephine
But
having
that was all
blabbed to some-
speculative,
all
not like
speculative.
how it
But
ended
they're
up
saying
happening.
oddly specific things. Like Josephine had
Right.
said previously that she's laying somewhere in the water. Like stuff like that is
I see,
weird.
I
So they
see,
are slipping up
I
in the
see.
things that they're blabbering to people about. So Naya had revealed all this to the police, but even that didn't lead to a speedy investigation that she was hoping for. And when the police still didn't properly interrogate Josephine or search the water under the bridge for a body, Naya decided to go a step further to help the police out. Quote, "Take me under the bridge and show me how you did it," she said to Josephine, and Josephine agreed. Every time Josephine revealed a detail of that night, like how badly Reena was beaten up or how many of her teeth broke or how she fell to the ground, Naya pretended to be impressed. "Whoa, that's so cool," she would say, making Josephine reveal even more details. Naya couldn't believe how stupid Josephine was and how easy it was to get her to crack. Under the bridge, Josephine showed Naya the spot of the fight. But then something weird happened. Naya asked her where they threw the body, and instead of saying right here in the water, Josephine pointed straight out to the water across the bridge miles away. How? Naya asked, genuinely curious. How could they have possibly carried Reena so far away to the other side of the water if she was so badly beaten up? How could Reena have walked that far if she was so badly beaten up? She just couldn't understand how Reena could be beaten up here but thrown into the water there, so far away. So she prodded some more. How? How did you take her body there? "Oh, I don't know. I wasn't there for that part." These details stuck with Naya because of how little sense they made. Beaten up here, thrown in there, and Josephine wasn't there for that part. Yet again, Naya made a valiant effort of taking this information to the police, even offering to record Josephine and Dusty and Kelly brag about the murder and the fact that the body was somewhere in the water. But her one suggestion to the police was, get the divers and the helicopters to search the water. Reena's body was somewhere in there, Naya was sure. And for some reason, almost as if Naya's enthusiasm rubbed off on the cops decided to revisit the scene of the crime and bring into custody one girl whom they thought would know something. A girl named Maya. The inspector on the case had known Maya for years, ever since Maya was a baby, and had watched her father get stabbed and brutally killed in his own home. And so the inspector thought she could get Maya to talk about who all was under the bridge that night.
The investigator on this case is a woman.
Is a woman, yes.
So I mean, to some degree, it might help in
Yeah, another woman.
helping her
Absolutely.
understand
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
going
yeah.
on in these girls' brains.
Yeah. But as the police began talking to Maya, it became obvious Maya was there that night, under the bridge, beating Reena up with the other girls. But not only had Maya witnessed the fight go down, she had seen something else. Once the group dispersed after the fight, Maya's mom had come to pick her up from the nearby grocery store. Maya had gotten into the car with her mother to go back home, but Maya's drive back home went through the top of Craigflower Bridge, where she just was moments ago beating Reena up. As Maya's car drove on top of the bridge, and as she looked out of the window, thinking of the secrets this bridge now held, she saw two people walking from the other side of the bridge, where Josephine said the body was thrown into the water, walking towards the bridge. She knew these two people. She was friends with these two people. "Who were they, Maya?" the inspector asked. "Maya, someone's child is missing. I don't care if your friends are involved. You will tell the police what you know," her mom snapped at her. It was Kelly Ellard and Warren G. Chapter 10. Thank God it's Friday. By the time the police learnt of what Maya had seen on the bridge, Friday had rolled around again. It had been a week since Reena didn't return home, a week since she made that distressing call to her brother. It was Friday again, and so the police knew where they would find the youth of View Royale. they'd find them in the field outside Shoreline Jr., exactly where they had been last Friday on the night of the Russian satellite. And so that's where the police headed to do more than just interrogate. They first took Tara into the car, the girl who had watched from the top, whose boyfriend tried to get Warren G to not beat Reena. They took another girl named Marissa into the car. Then the police took Warren G, a boy who hadn't tried to run away from the cops because he had nowhere else to go. Sarita watched Warren, unlike the others, be handcuffed. "Warren Glowatsky, you're under the arrest for the murder of Reena Virk," said the officer. And in that moment, Sarita felt that knot in her stomach again, the same knot as that night. At the police station, each interrogation room seated one of the suspects, and the waiting room housed their mothers, who cried and wailed and vomited at the thought of what their kids had done. Inspectors from the time recall how weird it was to watch so many interrogation rooms being filled by kids. They were all just kids. None of them looked like seasoned murderers. In the room that seated Kelly Ellard, a children's interrogation room, she told the police she didn't even know Reena and thought her name was Trina. She said she was never at the field or under the bridge that night. She said she never told anyone she beat Reena up. She kicked a teddy bear used to comfort kids and threw a fit, claiming to want to kill everyone who told the cops that she was involved in this. In a different room, Warren G was being interrogated by two of the most seasoned cops the force had. Despite this interrogation, though, none of them broke, giving different conflicting alibis, clearly making up excuses. Even though the kids weren't confessing, those who watched this day play out say they knew that the police thought they had the right people. They knew because of the caliber of investigators deployed to interrogate some 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And so that night, the police didn't let any of them leave the station. They needed a different approach to this investigation, though. "Let's focus on finding a body," the cops said to each other. Chapter 11. 187 Murder. The next morning on Saturday, November 22nd, 1997, a seasoned diving team dove into the water under the Craigflower Bridge with buoyancy compensators, scuba gear, and 25-pound oxygen tanks on their backs to find the missing girl. On top, in the sky, a helicopter stood still in the air, looking down at the water to see if they could see a body from high up above and direct the scuba team to a specific location. While this team took hours to search, the investigators investigated the kids. A few headed over to Sarita's home to ask her some questions. Any clues at this moment would be helpful. The moment she saw the police, Sarita cried. The boy she loved, the gentlest boy she had ever known, was behind bars for murder. It must have been a mistake, she remembers thinking at that time. Maybe Reena drowned by mistake and Kelly and Josephine made up a rumor about her death and Warren got dragged along, she remembers thinking. "Can we get a statement from you, Sarita? If your emotions get in the way, we'll stop. But we think you can do this." Sarita agreed to give a statement. She told the police about last Friday, the night of the Russian satellite. Then, they asked her if she had seen Warren the day after, on Saturday. "He came over Saturday afternoon. My friend Tara had told me that a fight had happened and that he had kicked a girl in the head. So I asked him why he did it. He said he didn't know, that it just happened." "After that, did he ever talk to you about that night again?" the officer asked. "Yeah, one day after school I saw him and Kelly talking, but they stopped when they saw me. So I got mad at him, asking him if he was trying to hide stuff from me. Later in my room, he asked me if I really wanted to know what happened that night, if I really wanted to know what him and Kelly were talking about. I told him if it was a big deal and he didn't want to tell me, I didn't want to know. There was a song playing in my room, 187 by Spice One. 187 in gang talk is murder or whatever. And then he said, that's what happened to her. And that was the end of the conversation." "Did he say he had done this 187, the cop prodded. "No, he said him and Kelly, something happened. He was standing there and Kelly was doing something to her." "Relax, Rita. Take a moment. Think about it. You keep saying something happened. Maybe you don't want to say what happened, but we all know it. That something was a terrible thing. And at some point, it needs to be said," the cop consoled her. "He just kind of said they had gone back there and they had dragged her into the gorge. He said Kelly was kicking and stomping on her head. Kelly had held her underwater for 5 minutes and then they threw her in. When they dragged her underwater, her pants came off. Sarita, when you picture it, do you see him and Kelly dragging her into the water or just Kelly? I see him and Kelly. Kelly couldn't drag her alone. In the same way, do you see him and Kelly stomping on her or just Kelly? I see just Kelly, but maybe that's how I want to see it. From this conversation with Sarita and from the conversation with Maya, the girl who saw two people walking over the bridge from her car, the police knew two things for certain. Firstly, after the group had split up, after Reena had been beaten up, after they had all seen her wipe her face and climb the stairs and walk on the bridge towards her home, someone went back and found her as she stumbled back home, hoping to make it to the safety of her parents' arm. That someone had attacked her a second time, stomped on her head, held her underwater for 5 minutes, dumped her into the gorge, and killed her while the others lay in their bed trying to sleep this horrible night off, while Sarita put her pillow on the floor out of unease. Secondly, the police knew that the people who went back were most likely Warren G and Kelly, confirmed by the stories of Sarita and Maya. Were Dusty and Josephine or Lila or others involved? The police now needed to figure that out. But this task was hard. At the police station, Josephine was steadfast in not snitching on her best friend, more sister than best friend, Kelly. In the other room, however, Kelly, the girl who had claimed to do anything for Josephine, was throwing Josephine under the bus, telling the police if anyone killed her, it had to be Josephine. But while these interrogators were interrogating the kids, under the bridge, the diving unit found Reena's white underwear and then her blue jeans. But after hours of searching, there was no Reena, until the helicopter in the sky spotted something. A girl lay in the weeds, far from where the beating had taken place, far from where the dive team was searching. Her body had drifted to a nook of the water where it now lay, lifeless, cold, slowly decomposing, but with the marks of a fight and a cigarette stub still fresh on her face. The dive team was alerted by the helicopter, after which they got out of the water, sat in the car, and drove to the spot of the body. There she was, Reena Virk. The rumors stood confirmed. Young girls may not have died on Vancouver Island, but one just had died. The officers interrogating the youth back at the station got the news that the body had been found, and now they knew exactly how to break the kids who hadn't been breaking. They first started with Warren G, spending hours trying to get him to speak. They scared him, told him countless people had seen him hit Reena under the bridge, and the others had seen him on the bridge later with Kelly. They told him no jury would believe Kelly, who was much smaller than Reena, killed and dragged Reena into the water herself. Warren was going to go down with her. They scared him, saying Reena's underwear and pants were missing, and no jury was going to believe Kelly took off her underwear and pants. Girls don't do that to each other, they said. They told him the jury would conclude Warren went back to rape her and ended up murdering her with some assistance from Kelly. But after hours of these scare tactics, the moment the cops changed their tone, spoke to Warren with respect as if talking to a friend, Warren broke and revealed the true tale of the night. He revealed that after the frenzy of the fight, after the group split, Warren and Kelly ended up walking back together. When Kelly said she wanted to talk to Reena, she wanted to make sure Reena was sorry for all the trouble she had caused. So we went back to find her and saw her close to the bridge. There we ordered her to take her shoes and jacket off. Then we beat her up more until she was woozy. Then Kelly grabbed her head and smashed it against a tree. Then Kelly started kicking her in the head and the ribs. I didn't kick her then, when she was on the ground. Then she started choking on her blood. That's when Kelly dragged her for about 9 or 10 feet. At least 3 times I said to Kelly, let's leave, because I didn't want to do any of this. I didn't kill her. I didn't sexually assault her. This was the end of the interrogation. Using Warren's statement, the police had enough to arrest the 6 girls, the Shoreline 6 as they came to be called, Kelly, Dusty, Josephine, Maya, Lila, and a girl named Willow. They, along with Warren G, would soon be put on trial. Chapter 12. Trial of the Shoreline 7. When trial began, not much was left to the imagination of the jury. Countless came forward with details that corroborated Warren G's statement. For example, a boy Kelly had gone to school with ran into her on the bridge the night of the Russian satellite. She seemed stressed, with her pants wet up to her knees, and just told this boy that she had just held a girl underwater and killed her. Countless such people, including the Russian girl Naya, their school principal, the boy who was trying to hit on Kelly, the other kids who watched the attack but didn't participate, they all came forward to recount details that tied the story of Reena's murder in a tidy bow. At trial, the systematic logs of the Seven Oaks group home would come to Josephine and Dusty's rescue, showing that they had both come back home that night together at 11:03, with, quote, nothing unusual about appearance, no signs of intoxication, end quote. At the end of the trial, in 1998, Warren G., who was 17 years old by then, was sentenced to second-degree murder, for which he was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 7 years. In prison, he discovered he had Native American heritage and worked with other indigenous elders in prison to accept responsibility for the crime by apologizing to Reena's family. He even hugged Reena's parents when he was granted a temporary pass to leave prison in 2006.
I've been able to realize the hurt that I've done to people, the hurt that I've done to myself. And that alone has helped me and made me want to change.
In 2010, at the age of 29, Warren walked out of prison with Reena's mother wishing him well. I am thankful and grateful you have taken responsibility for your actions. From here, you have to go forward. I hope you stick to your path and prove that you have learned from your experiences and will truly love and respect others for the rest of your life, said Reena's mom. Kelly Ellard, the quiet, curfew-abiding girl who people described as Josephine's shadow, was also, like Warren, convicted of second-degree murder, for which she was given life in prison in 2007 after a mistrial. In 2016, when Kelly was 33 years old, she was denied parole because she still didn't seem to display any remorse or responsibility for Reena's killing. Kelly then went on to get pregnant twice in prison with a man she is no longer in contact with. Eventually, when she was granted parole, she denied it herself, saying she wasn't ready for life outside prison. The only sign of remorse from Kelly came this year in 2024 when she told her corrections officer that she thinks the new Hulu series on Reena's murder, based on the book we've used for this episode, would be traumatizing to Reena's family. Josephine, Dusty, Maya, Lila, and Willow were all not found guilty of Reena's murder, but they were all found guilty of aggravated assault and given a year in juvenile detention. All of them, now in their 40s, have changed their names, possibly started families, and have kids who party and gossip and start friendships and end friendships. Whether or not they fear for the lives of their children based on their own actions, I guess we'll never know. Today, Reena too would have been in her 40s. Had she been alive, maybe her mother would also be alive. Suman Virk passed away in 2018 at age 58 after she was left brain dead during an accident. But maybe, just maybe, in a happier version of this world, where there are no kids kicked out of homes and no girls with mob obsessions and there are no teenage rivalries and nobody who feels like they don't belong, Suman and Reena live today, together, happily ever after. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.